Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
So something we've already touched upon, and this is this letter from 60 CEOs of Minnesota-based companies, more than 60, I should say, have called for an immediate de-escalation of tensions between state, local, and federal authorities as the state is reeling from another fatal shooting of an American by immigration agents. The chief executive officers of companies, they include Target, Best Buy, Land O'Lakes, Cargill, General Mills, United Health Group, as well as professional sports teams, including the Minnesota Vikings, among the signatories of the letter that was shared yesterday, Sunday, by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. We're laying that out for those who are watching on streaming and TV. Just to get to the crux of it, though, the open letter says, we are calling for an immediate de-escalation of tensions and for state, local, and federal officials to work together to find real solutions. This is why Tom Homan is headed to Minnesota.
Our next guest is head of a company in the great state of Minnesota. We're talking about Fastenal. Recently reported earnings, the stock selling off on the day of the report, but rallying the day after the most in 9 months. That trade reaction had us scratching our heads, so we're grateful, Carol, to have back with us to talk about the release of the outlook. The CEO of the close to $50 billion market cap company, Fastenal, Dan Florness, is back with us.
Yeah, so delighted. Let's get to it. Dan, good to have you here. Happy New Year. We do love talking with you. We feel like we get a great read on the U.S. economy, the manufacturing world. You've seen a lot in your career, and we want to get to all of this. But I really do feel like we'd be remiss to not ask you about what's going on in your home state. And I feel like those who are listening might be curious if you were asked to sign this letter of CEOs who want a de-escalation of what's happening in Minneapolis specifically. So were you aware that this letter was happening, or were you asked to sign it?
First off, Happy New Year, and thanks for allowing me to participate today. I was not aware of it. We're outstate Minnesota. We're about 2.5 hours from the Minneapolis-St. Paul market. And so it's not uncommon. It's a pretty tight-knit group up in the Twin Cities, and was not aware of it going out. With that said, was not surprised by it going out, and it seemed to be pretty common sense of, hey, let's dial down the heat.
So would you have signed it, though, if asked?
Yeah, I would have signed that.
We talk so much about leadership at this time, and I am curious what you see as the responsibility of leaders in the United States when we see situations happening where it feels like, and again, I don't want to get political, I don't want to take sides, but it does feel like Americans are being, what some would say, is targeted unfairly.
Yeah, I think as a leader, one of our tasks are to create some calm in the air. I think back a few years ago when COVID was going on, it seemed like everybody every day turned everything into a political thing. And sometimes it's a case of, if you're around a bunch of people that are high at risk in the case of COVID, put a mask on. If you're not and you don't want to be there, then go someplace else. Same thing here. Let's try to dial the heat down and focus on what we're trying to accomplish, not how we can see who can be the most boisterous in the market of throwing ideas out, and that's on both sides of the fence.
Dan, one thing that we're trying to figure out is getting a good read on the economy, and you guys have such a great read on it, given that you touch so many sectors. I mean, if you're using nuts, bolts, screws, anchors, rivets, any kind of fastener, industrial janitorial safety supplies, you guys do it. On earnings, you mentioned the broader market conditions remained mixed. What exactly did you mean by that? When you say mixed, what's the good, what's the bad?
Well, mixed from the standpoint, we focus a lot on the Purchasing Managers Index, published by the ISM, and that's been sub 50 for 36 of the last 38 months. So from the standpoint of the economy's not giving us any lift, we are getting good traction in the marketplace, and we finished out the last half of 2025 with double-digit growth. That's really an exercise of taking market share more than the wind is to our backs.
And I know we've talked about this too, Dan, with you about being in a prolonged downturn in the industrial economy. Any green shoots that you were seeing or signs of an inflection? And if so, I'm just curious what markets might you be optimistic and which are maybe running weaker than you anticipated and maybe will continue to this year?
Yeah, this is a little bit of an anecdotal answer, so I apologize for that. We're seeing in some of the published data, some industrial production numbers improving late in the year. We aren't seeing that directly in our business, but for us, November, December is a seasonally weak period, so that doesn't surprise me that we won't see it. So don't know if there's some green shoots there. I can tell you this from my travel, if it's a business that's linked to certain industries and data center is an example from a recent trip I had on the East Coast where I was visiting a mechanical contractor, and their business was on fire, and 70% of their activity was around data centers.
So go ahead.
So that's the good part, right? And
that's the good part.
That story we keep hearing about the AI build out, the data center build out, you saw it firsthand. It's real.
It's real. It's real. In fact, I spend a big chunk of my time having conversations with our district leaders. We have about 240 district managers. They each run about a $35 million business. You add them all up, that's an $8 billion Fastenal. So I had a conversation with our team in Atlanta this morning, one of our district managers, and most of his discussion was about business pickup he's seeing in his market because of data centers. Now, Atlanta is unique in that it's one of a handful that are really being impacted by that build-out.
What is the pricing power, Dan, that the company has right now? Because historically, during periods of inflation, you've been able to be pretty aggressive with price increases. I think people would argue you weren't as aggressive as you could have been in 2025. What's the barrier to pushing price more aggressively?
Well, the one barrier is the size of the customer, the nature of the products, how much of it is production centered versus maintenance centered. And because when it's production centered business, you have customers buying a very large volume of narrow band of SKUs. And their price sensitivity is different than if it's MRO and they're buying, $100 of this and $100 of that.
One of the things I want to ask you too, there was a story on my read-in this morning, Dan, in terms of Volkswagen saying that they had plans for a possible Audi factory in the United States. They're not progressing due to President Donald Trump's tariffs and unsuccessful talks for local incentives. So we have certainly seen an administration that talks about all the investment money coming into the U.S. And I think we here at Bloomberg continue to try and figure out how much of this is actually going to play out. You can say you're going to invest, and then there's the reality of actually building facilities. First of all, tariffs, and I know we've talked about this with you in the past, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but you're thinking about outsourcing. How have tariffs changed that, especially when it comes to fasteners, I think primarily sourced from China and Asia. So I'm just curious how any of it's been shifting for you.
Yeah, so you are absolutely correct. Most of the fasteners in this country, in North America in general, come from Northern Asia, China primarily. Obviously, huge impacts. And for us, what it's meant is for about the last 7 years, we've been actively expanding our ability to import fasteners because there's still not a lot of domestic production. And so when I think back to 2018, our primary sourcing entity was based in Shanghai with a secondary location in southern Taiwan. Today we have personnel in Bangkok, we have personnel in India, and that's where all of our growth and movement of sourcing personnel has occurred over the last 7-8 years to just broaden our ability to be a little more agile in where you source from, depending on the geography it's going into.
So that's on the sourcing side, but what about on your customer side and about customers moving manufacturing back to the U.S.? Are you seeing that happen? Are you hearing discussions of that?
Yeah, I guess, anecdotally, yes. I can't say that we've seen a tremendous influx. What I would say is I hear less about stuff leaving than maybe I would have, 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And that in itself is a win from the standpoint of production. But, a lot of it is folks are getting closer to where the end customer is for a lot of our customers. And so when I see customers expanding production facilities in North America, and I'll say more broadly to North America rather than just the United States, it's usually to service more efficiently the local market.
Which makes sense. Which we've seen that trend happening. I feel like over time. Hey Dan, you mentioned about maybe less companies leaving the U.S. Speaking of leaving, you are stepping down as CEO come July. You've been CEO since 2016. You were CFO before that, going back to 2002. You've been there a long time, and I know last time you were on, I asked you a question about this cycle, and I was not very kind. I got yelled at by my team because I think I gave you 20 seconds. But I wanted we do get yelled at.
You get 25 seconds now.
No. You've got almost 2 minutes. How do you describe this cycle? Because it feels unusual.
Well, it's unusual in that you hear about everything, whereas in years past there was so much of this political stuff that went on, but most of it, if you weren't in the midst of it, you were oblivious to, and you went around about your life. Now everybody hears about everything when it happens, so that's just a lot more noise. On the flip side, what's really different is I mentioned on that conversation with the team in Atlanta this morning, we were talking about data centers, and one of the people on the call, he leads our business in the southern U.S. He said, "Hey Dan, I'm going to flip you something." And he punched in a bunch of questions, and he came back with a 29-page report on the data center industry in the United States. And so I read through a bunch of it. It's actually pretty accurate and pretty good information. I mean, there's stuff in there I can pick apart, but it's pretty good.
Yeah. I know. Well, okay, now...
Dan still had to do the reading, though. It didn't read the report for him. So
I probably would have, but I'm old school, I guess.
Is that, just quickly, I know this is truly like 30 seconds, is that the most transformative change you think we'll see over the next decade, is just the continued impact of AI and things like ChatGPT and everything else connected? Just your quick thought on that.
Yeah, because when I think of our business, we're selling...
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of different parts to customers every day, and the ability to improve the visibility for folks sourcing all that stuff is an incredible efficiency tool.
All right. Dan, come back soon, especially before you leave in the summer. Dan, thank you.